is character assassination because it's a character, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We're all characters
So
here.
I don't like your character, so oh my goodness. Let's see here. Let me make sure that we're all doing good and get our reading up. And morning, Bruce Rawls. Bruce and I are reading Absence from Felicity, which is just proved to be so amazing. And with another person, I'm reading Never Forget to Laugh, the story of Bill Thetford. And
Great.
so
That's
I'm
another excellent book, isn't it?
and so I'm getting it from all sides. And then I just got this book. And I think we talked about it last week, maybe, I don't know, Double Vision.
Oh, you did get it. Okay.
I did. Oh yeah.
Oh,
And
good. Oh, good.
I went on Amazon. I found it from a reseller.
Oh, good.
And
Good.
actually it came from the O Ouachita Technical College library.
Huh. Okay.
And it had been checked out one time, April 21st, 1990. It's
Okay.
the only it's got the
Wow.
card in it and everything. So
So
I don't
you're
know
the
where
second person to
Ouachita.
check it out in from that particular book.
That's right, yeah. And I can see why too, because oh, it's in Arkansas, Malvern, Arkansas.
Ouachita.
It's pristine. The book is really beautiful, and it's got photographs in it, which are
Uh-huh.
very cool,
Yeah. Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
have never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
So cool, and it's really typeset in the craziest way. It's not very well uh, set. I don't know. I'm not sure, who the printer was or whatever, but well, I guess I can look here and see. It was Celestial Arts from Berkeley, California,
Uh-huh.
and
Sounds
we
right.
must not have went to printer school to learn how to typeset a book. But really, I'm excited. I got it yesterday in the mail, so I'm going to start reading it probably
Oh, cool.
today.
Yeah, it's a fun read. It's a fun read. I don't think there's as much substance in that as in what we're reading or in um Never Forget to Laugh, but it's still a fun read, and you can uh, experience what Judy and Tam went through and their interactions and what they learned from each other, and it's really a fun read. Yeah,
I'm excited, and
yeah,
I see, they saw Yuri Geller,
yeah.
which back in the day that was a big deal. When
Oh yeah, yeah. I still think that he should have married Reese Witherspoon, though.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, think of her last name. If you remember what he was famous for.
Bending spoons. Oh. Oh my
Anyway,
gosh.
just
Yeah,
silly
that's very
wordplay on my
funny,
part, but
silly.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, it's really funny because you watch those videos of him bending the spoons and it just looks so real, but of course it was all trickery. All of it just is amazing to me, how gullible we all are. But I had that deck of cards with the wavy lines and the star and the cross and all that business. And we used to practice who was most. There were times when I was like really psychic. I could guess if you put out a deck of cards, red, black, consistently.
Uh-huh.
I could guess what they were, but I
Yeah,
don't
there's
think.
there's a name for that deck of five geometric symbols which I've escapes me at the moment. But I remember using that, and I was part of one of many hundreds, maybe thousands of subjects in Charlie Tart's experiments at UC Davis, University of California, Davis, and he was the professor who coined the phrase altered states of consciousness. And he
Ooh.
wrote a very scholarly book about it. And I took the class that was with that title. And I don't think he expected, because it was like 600 pages. I don't think he expected any of the students to read the whole thing, but he assigned reading from it. And then I also took a class on Gurdjieff from him, and also one on humanistic psychology.
Ooh, nice.
And anyway, where was I going with that? So something about, oh, I know it was in the same that same era that Uri Geller was doing all his stuff, but I I still derailed my thought. Anyway, it'll come to me. But
Yeah,
but
it's really interesting that you said, you took a classic Gurdjieff. Man, that would, in my little cow town of Greeley, Colorado, that was, that would have been like, what is that? But
well, he Charlie Tart pioneered a lot of things at the university there that probably wouldn't have been uh, offered otherwise in an Aggie school, if you will. Even though it was in California, it was still very much an Aggie school. But I did take electronic music and a few other kind of uh, kind
things
of
that were hopping at the time.
things that
Oh
were
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
because
I mean I had access to a big Moog synthesizer and a Buchla synthesizer, and
you
that was
did. Oh my gosh.
so much fun to play with those when I was in
Oh.
my late teens and early 20s. Yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah,
were big fans of now Wendy Carlos
right,
was
right.
Walter. The
Yep,
oh my Lord,
yep.
the Moog synthesizer was stuff. There was so much great music.
I got one of the original calendars from Bob Moog and from 1971, I think, because that's when I really got into it. And I had that in a binder with a whole bunch of other catalogs from that era, and I loaned it out to somebody and never came back. But I had fun, dabbling with it. And I still have. Oh gosh, I think finally let the real stuff go a couple years ago when I
Oh my
anyway,
gosh.
we're getting sidetracked
Ancient
here.
history. But
Ancient history.
we're talking about ancient history though. We're
Ancient history,
reading
yeah.
about stuff that happened with
In
Helen
in
and Bill
in
and
dream figures, right? Well, we're
yeah.
reading ancient history too about Helen and
Uh,
Bill, but I think what's pulling us back is the what we can do to generalize what we're sharing to make it helpful and fun and interesting to whoever's listening. And because there's things that Helen learned and certainly uh, Bill and Ken and Judy that obviously were applicable to everyone. So that's why I'm
exactly.
enjoying this reading so
Exactly.
much. Yeah.
All right. So do you want to read? I think I got
Sure.
us at the right place while
Yep.
I got where
I see exactly the same thing in my last bookmark
okay,
here.
good.
So on the bottom of page 209 in the print version that I have of Absence from Felicity by the story of Helen Schuckman and her scribing of A Course in Miracles by Kenneth Wapnick, PhD, Ken begins his commentary on the bottom of page 209 with a few years ago, an article on the course appeared in the New York Times. It was relatively brief, a brief one that sketched the origins of the course and the growing interest in it. Maybe I should back up and look at the copyright date on this book just to put it in the context here. It was copyrighted 1991. So when Ken says a few years ago, he's referring to that era. Okay, so and he says the article was not the best, but it was positive in attitude and did have some of the facts correct. The Times was Louis's Bible, and so he was impressed with the fact that it would print something about his wife's book. Later that day, he called to tell me about the article, and when I asked him if he liked it, he replied in characteristic fashion how he did not read it. That's funny.
Exactly. That's hilarious
Excuse me.
because I mean the first thing you do is read
Did,
that book.
didn't read it. That's funny. Okay. After all, he said, I knew how hearing or even reading about Helen in the course made him uncomfortable. In point of fact, it was his cousin Dave who had called to tell him about it. And then he said, but Ken, I have to ask you a question. Dave told me the article said that the course had been dictated to Helen from Jesus. That's not true, is it? Helen never told me that. I explained to Louis that I was afraid that it was true, but I was sure he remembered how uncomfortable all of this made Helen, and that was why she never spoke about it. And then, that's right, Louis said. She never liked to talk about it. And there the matter rested. And now thinking about how, well, speaking for myself, um, for many years, and still to a certain extent, I don't publicly, you know, uh, uh, talk about myself as a course student or teacher or anything like that. I try to really soft pedal and really just kind of wait until someone, asks out of genuine interest rather than curiosity about my involvement in the course. And I don't really bring it up. In fact, last night we're having dinner with my wife and I with four other friends and uh, playing bunco and just having a good time. And and then the topic came around to, activities and my wife Nancy, who's not a course student but knows what I'm doing, uh, said, yeah, Bruce is on Zoom a lot, and but I didn't mention that it was all to do with A Course in Miracles, like 99% of it. But because I didn't feel it was necessary, and I figure at some point, if the people I'm with are interested, they'll ask, but it didn't feel, I'm just trying to let myself be guided by, what feels appropriate to the conversation, and but we had a wonderful time, and anyway, so when it seems appropriate, I bring it up, and most of the time I don't.
Right, because well, and what would be the point, really?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, oh, look at me, I'm a Course in Miracles student. No, don't look at me.
Yeah, and it's not. I think the attachment aversion, ideas in the Buddhist teachings, kind of apply here. Is like if I'm not talking about it and making a big deal about that, that's something I need to look at. If I am talking about it and making a big deal out about it, that's probably something I need to look at too, right? So
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. So, and really, because we're one mind, it doesn't matter whether they know about it or not.
right,
It's
right.
not like, it's they need to know or I need to. I think I know when I first started studying the course, I was like, let's get this to everybody because we all need
Missionary
to hear about
zeal.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then I realized, well, there isn't really anybody out there that
Right,
needs to
right,
hear about this, but
right.
I do. And
Yes.
I can and I realize even with my husband, you talk about, Nancy, Rick, he is not interested in any, he thinks it is just crazy stuff. He's not interested in any way at all, but he also tells me, yeah, but I know you're doing it for us.
Yeah,
So I don't
yeah.
have to do
Yeah,
anything.
well, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, yeah.
I think he's got a lot of faith. And, when I first was studying the course, he would have a lot of dreams where Jesus was coming to him and
Uh-huh.
doing things and telling him things, and he did not like it. He was really mad at me for bringing Jesus in, and and
I was perfectly miserable until you brought this in, right?
yeah, really. One night in particular, he dreamed that Jesus was talking to him, and he just punched him really hard. My husband punched Jesus really hard and knocked him over, and he was like one of those weebles that won't fall down. He just popped right back up, and it made him even madder. So he punched him again harder, and he fell back, and then he popped right back up, and then he's like, what, I can't even hurt you. And then he calmed down, and whatever it was that Jesus came to tell him, he listened to. But this was all in a dream. I was like, why doesn't Jesus come to me in my dreams? I but that's it's all in our minds. Our dreams are in our minds. And he was disturbed, I think, by the whole Jesus business. He's over it now.
Well, I think we all, in whether you're in the Western world or the other parts of the world, there's because of the pervasiveness of the English language around the world, and kind of by pull through default, the culture of this country. I mean, to a certain extent, um, there's a lot of baggage, both conscious and unconscious, that people all over the world have with Christianity and its message. And as Ken likes to say, there's nothing wrong with religion, but if you really look at the content of the Bible and the content of the course, they're for the most part 180 degrees out of phase and diametrically opposed. There are some places where the truth was able to get through relatively unscathed, but there's a lot there that really demonstrates that the biblical God is really congruent with the ego's God, because it basically makes the dream real, which is, the fun one of the fundamental ideas of the course is that anything in space and time that we try to make real has nothing to do with our creator, and therein lies our real hope. And so, hope is really dashed when you assume that our creator could be concerned with what happens or doesn't happen in our dream, right?
Yeah, and that would be scary and not helpful at all, thinking that, God was buying into all this stuff.
Hmm.
Because it would make it real. And that's the beauty of it, is that it can't be real. And so, that is the justification for all letting go of all of it,
Yep.
is
Yep.
it's not real. All right, let's see. So let's continue reading. Do you want me to read?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. So, however, to this day, and this, of course, you said was 1990,
91, 91.
91.
Uh-huh.
Okay. No, so Louis was still alive at that time. I'm sure he knows it now. But however, to this day, Louis remains fascinated about Helen's book and its phenomenal history from a publishing point of view. And he never fails to be touched by the countless stories he hears from people about how the course has helped them. Moreover, he has always been very insistent that I make sure that people know that A Course in Miracles is a religious book. He has repeatedly expressed concern to me about people presenting the Course in a non-religious and purely psychological manner, since he knew that Helen was a religious person and that the purpose of her book was to lead people closer to God. He moreover once acknowledged to me that he knew that if Christianity had taught the principles of the Course, there would never have been 2,000 years of anti-Semitism. And all of this, of course, from a man who never studied it. Although it
Hmm.
seems like he probably knew a lot more about it than we know, and still does not speak of it to his family and close friends. It has become his guilty secret, just as it had been his wife's. In
Yeah.
returning now to Helen's, do you want to say something there?
Well, I was just thinking about how, what we were talking about earlier about, our either zeal or reluctance to talk about the course to people that aren't necessarily involved in it, is a really good classroom, I think, for all of us who are studying the course, is just noticing when we feel discomfort. It's usually a clue. It's like, well, I'm either, wanting to change the dream to get my point across, or I'm reluctant to share because maybe I'm not, uh, maybe I'm feeling bad that I don't really, you know, trust the course's teachings uh, myself fully, and so there's that kind of, putting yourself out there kind of thing, that I remember when I even just first, a decade or so ago, give or take a few years, when Dove Fishman, when I met him in San Francisco at the conference there, and he said, "Well, you might like to get on ACM Gather, a year or two before you and I started doing what we've been doing for the better part of a decade." I was like, "Do I want to, put myself out there, even on a platform that was really probably only attended by primarily course students, but
Yeah,
there's that idea of a self that's representing a thought system, but yet in truth, what we are is not the little less self, and nor
exactly.
nor does it have anything to do with the ego's dualistic God with a lowercase g, right? As we were
Exactly.
talking about earlier.
And the representing, that we're representing the course, that in itself would be uh, enough to make someone who's not so well versed in it not want to be identified with it.
Right, right.
Because, I don't represent what the course, I didn't realize that at first, that I don't represent what the course teaches. But as I learned about the course, I realized that. I'm going to let you read a bit. I've got to take a real quick break.
Oh, okay.
I will be right back.
Okay, let's see. Let's see if we left off here. I think.
In returning now to Helen's.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we did finish that paragraph. That's right. Okay. And returning now to Helen's reactions to the scribing, we note that it was clear to her, despite her strong ambivalence about Jesus, that she was not the source of the writing. On that, she was unequivocal. So much for Louis calling it Helen's book. It was also clear to her that Jesus had made use of her, quote, educational background, interest, and experience, but that was in matters of style rather than content, unquote. That's a really important phrase there. And I think Ken will probably elaborate on here on this, but I know in many of his classes and talks, he's mentioned how the form of the course really was heavily influenced by Helen's interests. Um, the style, if you will. Helen loves Shakespeare, so much of the course is in Shakespearean blank verse and iambic pentameter. She loved Plato, so there's a lot of Platonic references, including the Plato's cave metaphor, analogy. Um, there's her love of Shakespeare as well as Plato, as well as Freud, obviously, because they were Freudian psychologists, Helen and Bill. And so the idea of repression and dissociation and all those psychological terms then found their way into the course. And so who did I forget? Shakespeare, Plato, Freud. Those are certainly some of the primary ones. There's probably a few other influences there. Oh, she loved the way the Bible was written, but she just didn't care at all for what it said for the most part. I think I'm saying that really correctly. Um, so yeah, so anyway, but so I think that form and content issue is really well addressed here with what Ken just said. So the form is a lot of times people will object to it because it's a little challenging to get into in some ways until you get used to that Shakespearean blank verse and the iambic pentameter and all that. And also the gender language was also typical of the era that it was written in. Obviously, a lot of that's changed in our culture, but it was perfect for the time that it was written, and yet the content is timeless. So, so there you go. So, um, I'll read another paragraph or so. Ken continues, in her autobiographical account, Helen noted that she was totally unaware of the mystical traditions of the East and West, all of which are important themes in the course's material. When Bill pointed out the course's parallels with traditional mystical thought, Helen became quite disturbed. And this is Helen's comments. The fact that my writing, i.e. scribing, was in apparent agreement with material about which I knew nothing was extremely disconcerting. The oblique and at times even quite direct explanations which turned up from time to time in the writing itself was even more distressing to me. It seemed most unlikely that Jesus or the Holy Spirit could or would use me as a vehicle for communication. Besides, I was by no means sure I believed in them. For a few brief periods, I did believe in the truth of what I was writing, and they were happy times of respite. I remember once getting into a cab and saying to myself unexpectedly, "Of course I believe in healing. Why fight it?" And then there's the end of the quote. And the whole cab seemed to light up with happiness. But for the most part, I was bleakly unbelieving, suspicious, and afraid. Well, there's that dichotomy, that ambivalence, that wishy-washiness that we all have toward what the course is saying, isn't it? And then I think that's why this is a perfect book for course students to use to see an example of from the very person who scribed it. That's those same characteristics that we're all working through and all helping each other look at without condemnation or judgment and with compassion and gentleness to patience to see that we all are a slowly undoing program, slow program of undoing our belief in separation.
And what's really interesting about it is that you have and I have, all of us have had these moments of, oh, I see. Oh, and then and yes, everything seems to light up with happiness. Um, for me, not so much uh still being bleakly unbelieving, suspicious and afraid because I've had enough of it that it's just I only look forward to knowing, recognizing or feeling that feeling of contentment. To me, that's how it is. It's
Uh-huh.
just a feeling of just total contentment that comes over
Yes.
me that, I just feel so happy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not anything that you can attribute to anything other than it just comes upon you. And that's spirit breaking through, I think, breaking through the ego thought system and just seeing there's nothing to fear here. I think that's what it is. There's just nothing to fear here. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Nothing to fear but fear itself. That's what's has been said. And yet that's uh it's kind of silly too when we do that, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we're just reading the psychotherapy pamphlet that anger is the basis for all the feelings that we have that are anything less than love. And fear is the result of anger. It's like
Mhm.
saying, God, you're not doing what you promised, or you're not doing what you should, or you're not a good enough parent, or we're angry at God.
Mhm. Pretty
Because God
silly.
gave us freedom.
Pretty silly, huh?
It really is just really silly.
Yeah.
Um, because yeah, it's because God gave us the freedom to do what we wanted, and we made a mess of it, and just like a little kid just saying, "You made me do this," but of course, that's the freedom that we have for just being His child. And he's just like, "Yep, you can mess things up all you want, have a lot of fun." And we do, and then we obviously blame him for the things that go wrong.
Our playpen of space-time is just a dream to perfect oneness, right?
Exactly, just a dream. So you want me to read?
Sure.
Okay. So the reader is asked to recall again the discrepancy between Helen's actual words that were written during this period in her letters to Bill and the pre-course notes and what she later retrospectively wrote years afterwards in her autobiography. In the former, Helen's belief in Jesus was consistently and clearly, if not emotionally, stated, while in the latter, Helen's fear led her to adopt a posture of disbelief, which was clearly superimposed after the fact upon her actual experience. So there it is, that dichotomy of,
Yep. Yep.
Jesus, I love you and I trust you, and then, why'd you let me do that?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It's just so silly when you look at it now. And I'm sure it's silly. I'm sure she saw how silly it was. Um, so anyway, to summarize, we may say that Helen's taking down A Course in Miracles inevitably aroused tremendous anxiety in her, and we can identify two major sources of this discomfort: the identification of Jesus as the inner voice, and the course's presentation of a thought system that was totally antithetical to her conscious beliefs and the way she lived her life. Let us briefly examine each of these in turn, beginning with Helen's relationship with God and Jesus.
Can I pause right there and we'll just
Yes.
talk because I think there's a really excellent place to just look again. Once again, this is seems to be a story about Helen, but I think it's everyone's story because we all have tremendous misgivings with maybe not with the specific author of the course. I suppose if someone has issues as a Christian, in a more conventional or formal sense, one way or the other, or if they've been exposed to that, and but whether you love it or hate it or have been in it or not, never been in it, there's still, because of the cultural um, pre preponderance of osmotic influence, I guess you could say, in the cultures around the world of Christianity. There's everyone probably, unless they've lived in a cave or an Aboriginal lifestyle, probably has heard or been exposed to Jesus and Christianity in some fashion or another. So we all have a relationship, one way or the other. So of course, really, it does not only mentions but encourages us to heal our relationship with the figure of Jesus, because there's so much been laid upon him, and it says that explicitly in the course. And so that's a part of our, a significant part of our forgiveness classroom. Because if we're even unconsciously fighting with the author of the course, well, that could be an issue. If you're taking a class and the teacher rubs you the wrong way. I'm laughing because my wife's taking a ceramics class, and my wife, who likes to do things her own way a lot of times, she was starting to make some wings for this clay figure, and the teacher of this class wasn't ready to have them do that part yet. But Nancy, my wife, was going ahead because she realized that she didn't have access to the materials that she needed to do what everyone else is doing. So she said, well, I might as well start on the wings for this project. And the teacher walked up to her and said, no, no, no. And she was like thinking, oh my gosh, this is like, being reprimanded as like a 2-year-old or something like that. So we were laughing about it, but I'm sure it's probably a little disconcerting to, but I was thinking, well, we all have teachers that we admire because they, as Ken points out in some of his classes, you know, that we look back on the teachers that we really felt supported us and were encouraging and had that kind of relationship to, and we look fondly back on those experiences, and probably a whole lot less fondly to the ones that made us feel horrible, or at least on our mind. That seemed to be the outcome, huh?
Yeah, that's very true. And it kind of goes both ways though,
Oh, of
because
course, of course.
when I was in high school, I was an art major. All
Yeah.
through college and everything. In the beginning, before I started, fell in love with biology. Well, I got into science. I was an art major and I loved art. I was just like really, I was the what do you call it, the assistant in the art room.
Uh-huh.
And like three of my five class periods a day were art, had something to do with art. And so I was constantly in the art room. And uh, there were a couple of things. One, I drew a picture of a rose that was growing in my mom's garden
Yeah.
and gave it to the teacher, showed it to the teacher. And it was a very good drawing. And she tore it up. And she
Oh
said, "No one
gosh.
draws roses in my class." It was flat. No one draws
Oh
roses in my
man.
class. So I was like, crushed from that, thinking,
Sure, sure.
but I didn't blame myself. I didn't say, well, that was a bad rose. I was like, this woman is insane. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so
Wow.
that, and then I had another project that I was working on. It was, kind of big and kind of, in the way a lot. But I thought it was really, something really sociologically significant. I was, 15. So, I really thought I knew something. And I came in one day and it was gone.
Oh,
That she had had the janitor just take it out and throw it away.
oh gosh.
So, I mean, I was like crushed, but I didn't say it's because I'm a bad artist. I said it
Mm-hmm.
was because she was a bad teacher. And
Yeah, yeah.
I went on and did art in college, and like I said, until I started looking through microscopes and learning about the living world, and I just became overwhelmed by wanting to be a biologist. And so I was a biologist for the first three, maybe 2.5 years I was in school, and then
Hmm.
I had to take I went to school over at University of Colorado in Boulder, and I
Uh,
had to take an art class there. And so I took a ceramics class, and boom, I was like, forget about biology. I want to
gotcha.
be a ceramic artist.
Wow. Wow. Huh.
And I mean, that carried me. I was for I have my own potter's wheel. I have my own kiln, everything here. I really got
Oh,
into
really?
it.
Huh.
I haven't done it for years, so
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just sitting in the garage getting dusty, and I'm sure the kiln is still in great shape. So,
Wow.
why am I saying all those things? Is because it doesn't matter what the teacher is doing. It's how engaged is the student in whatever it is that the teacher is teaching. And Helen was really, if she wanted to know about Jesus, it sounds like from the time she was a little child,
Mm-hmm.
she was, Jesus was something that she was really interested in, or wanting, or longing for,
Mm-hmm.
longing for that. So yeah, this is going to be interesting to hear what Ken's take on her relationship with God and Jesus is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah. Actually, as you're sharing about your educational and professional history, going from biology to nuclear uh, power, I was thinking, that sounds like my dad. He had a degree in biology from Fresno State, and then ended up working as a cyclotron supervisor
yeah, well,
at Lawrence Livermore Lab.
that came out of necessity because, after a while I didn't have any more money to go to school, and the thing that I did have that was, something I could get a job doing was chemistry. I had taken all that chemistry.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So I
Interesting.
went to work in a laboratory, and when went to work in a laboratory, then it was all back to science again, and that's how I ended up getting my degree in environmental engineering, environmental science, and all
Uh,
that business because, necessity led me there. So then that's how I ended up working at the nuclear facility,
uh,
was because I knew chemistry.
uh-huh.
Wow, it's pretty funny. That's why I always encourage, my kids, study everything because you never
Oh,
know
yeah.
what's going
Oh,
to
for
end up
sure.
being, your life's work. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
but yeah, I find that really interesting because in the Bell Thetford book, we're reading about him
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
working in Chicago with in the nuclear program, in the first reaction under the ball field, that all that business. And after the bomb, after we dropped the bomb on Japan, and he said, "Well, I guess my work here's done." Pretty much that's how he didn't put it quite that way, but kind of.
Yeah.
And went on and became a psychologist. So I just find that really interesting how we all got involved in this nuclear business at one point or another. It's part of our heritage in this generation, I think, is this involvement with the finer particles of the universe.
Yeah, and also I think what comes to mind is having I watched Oppenheimer last summer and growing up in what I joke is a nuclear family, literally and figuratively. Uh, I think of the idea that in modern physics attempts to in many ways unleash and sort of co-opt the fire of the cosmos, the Promethean fire kind of thing, the Prometheus myth, stealing fire from the gods kind of thing. And I was thinking, well, that's the authority problem that we all have. It's really just one more example of that, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And of course, it seems to be so much more extreme
Hmm.
now, but really, it's no different than it's always been.
Yeah.
It's always been extreme. Every generation, every situation, because it's the ego, and it's there's no order of difficulty and miracles, and there is no hierarchy of illusions. It's all the same thing. If it's crazy, it's crazy. Oh.
And it is.
All right, let me see. Where are we at? Okay, so you want me to read out, or you want to read?
Uh, go ahead and read.
Okay, all right. So though again, much has been made in A Course in Miracles circles of Helen's once having written that she was an atheist, this statement was given in the same spirit of retroactively protecting the guilty secret of her inner life that we have been discussing. Helen adopted a quote unquote persona as an atheist, New York psychologist to mask her underlying love of God.
Mhm.
Closer to the truth would have been the phrase, quote, militant or angry atheism, unquote, that Helen occasionally used to describe her religious outlook. Militant atheist.
Wow.
Excuse me. And clearly, one does not need to be a trained psychologist to recognize that one cannot be militantly opposed to something or someone that is not believed in. I mean, right there, you got your
Reaction formation, right?
exactly,
Uh-huh.
exactly. Hang on, I'm going to cough. There we go. All right. I have already spoken of Helen's lifelong inner conflict as reflecting what the Course refers to from the ego's point of view as the battle between God and the ego. Once A Course in Miracles began, the dynamics of this conflict centered firmly on the figure of Jesus, the problem she believed she had successfully resolved through a process of dismissal and inattention. The second source of anxiety associated with Helen's scribing, A Course in Miracles, and closely connected to the first, was the ego-threatening nature of the Course's teachings themselves.
Mhm.
Helen's, quote, war against God, unquote, was strengthened by her one, ongoing preoccupation with sickness, two, a continual self-identification as a victim, justified in making angry judgments of almost anyone and anything, and above all, three, the firm conviction that she was in control of her life, certain that she knew her own best interests. And
Mm.
yet, here she was, devotedly taking down at a considerable personal cost of time and energy her, quote, life's work, unquote, that taught exactly the opposite, namely, one, sickness was a defense against the truth, a decision made in the mind and then projected onto the body. Two, attack and judgment of others were never justified, but were simply a projection onto others of our own responsibility for feeling separated. And three, we do not know our own best interests and should rather leave all decisions to the loving guidance of the Holy Spirit or Jesus. So this is a like huge conflict with her.
Mhm.
The opposition of her stated persona, her picture of herself
Mhm.
that she worked so hard to project to the world that was so completely opposite of what she knew was the truth or what she was writing down
Mhm.
every day as the truth. And she was hearing a voice in her mind telling her was the truth. And how what a conflict that had to have been. I know it because it's a conflict in me too.
Mhm.
I have the same thing. I'm going to be, I have, allergies, I have this, I have that, I'm a, whatever. But I know that sickness is a defense against the truth, and it's a decision that's made in the mind and projected onto the body, just like Helen knew. And that, all the things that I think that I'm doing, this is why we're so conflicted and we have this uh it's like a personality. It's like a multiple personality disorder, really.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
like,
yeah,
you
exactly.
you are a different person every time, and all you have to do is just change the way you're thinking about things, and you become a different person altogether.
Yep. Yeah, the clinical term that I know Dr. Bob Rosenthal used in some of his work, in his writing, was, and he worked with many patients with this as dissociative identity disorder, or DID,
Hmm.
also known as schizophrenia. But in a sense, as he points out in his eloquent writing, we're all doing that because we think that there's more than one person. We think that there's about 8 billion just humans alone on this planet, let alone all the other fauna and flora and and other planets and whatnot. It's like ad infinitum almost. And yet the course reminds us that that's a misunderstanding. It's not a sin. It says you have not sinned, but you've been much mistaken, and that that's really the fundamental premise on which a lot of Eastern mysticism, as well as the course's perspective and metaphysical foundations, rest on the idea that duality is just a misunderstanding, but it's a forgivable misunderstanding. And if I can remember that more often, I'm going to be more peaceful. And that's the very practical application
Exactly.
of the course's metaphysics. Yeah.
And you know that also what they call it cognitive dissonance.
I really like that phrase, yeah, because
I do too.
I think it really, even though it's a fancy mouthful, it basically, if you think about, our cognitive processes, which is really taking neutral data from our senses and then giving it interpretations that we assign tremendous emotional and psychological meaning to, where it doesn't really exist on its own. Um, and then the dissonance comes from the recognition that there's part of our mind, our right mind, that recognizes that we're making this stuff up, and if we're getting upset about what we're making up, it's clearly insane. And what we're making up is the idea that we've separated from each other and from our creator. And what could be crazier than that when we look at it sanely? And so that, of course, asks us to, consider maybe there's a sane way of looking at things
Yeah,
from so many different angles. Huh?
exactly, exactly. And excuse me, I'm doing a group on Thursday nights where we're studying the psychotherapy pamphlet.
Yeah.
And he at the very beginning of it says, the purpose of psychotherapy really is to recognize, that you are, thinking insanely. To
Hmm.
recognize that you and of course we always say that, a person can't be helped until they admit they have a problem. But admitting that you have a problem because you're thinking one thing and you're doing something else. And what Jesus calls honesty in the manual for teachers is really
Consistency.
consistency,
Yep.
which is what you think and what you do are all the same. You're
Right.
not, you don't have that conflict going on. And we don't even recognize, that that's dishonest. If I do, if I say I believe one thing and I'm doing something different, I'm not being honest with myself, um, or anybody else, because I'm living a lie. I'm thinking a lie. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
so much can be gained from just looking at your insane thoughts. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, let's see what do we got here. In about 10 more minutes. I don't know if you have to leave a little early. That's fine too. But let's see here. He says, Helen intuited that consciously to allow God into her life meant the end of her own ego system and any control she would exercise over her life. A Course in Miracles states, you have built your whole insane belief system because you think you would be helpless in God's presence, and you would save yourself from his love because you think it would crush you into nothingness. You think you have made a world God would destroy, and by loving him, which you do, you would throw this world away, which you would. And that's
I
how
think
he
that's such a
thinks.
potent sentence, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it really reminds us that if we really honestly evaluated the effectiveness of our egos in bringing us peace, we would realize that the scorecard would show a absolute zero effectiveness. And even though it tries to co-opt the successes we've had in real genuine peace, all of those are completely attributable to trusting Holy Spirit. And that it's that again, that cognitive dissonance is bringing the two thought systems together honestly and comparing them side by side, juxtaposed on the same parameters and the same merits, and realizing that the ego just does not work. I mean, it's completely consistent, as Ken points out, just as the Holy Spirit is. But the only difference between the two thought systems, which is the important one, is the Holy Spirit is completely sane and the ego is completely insane. And that's a pretty important distinction. And that's
Yeah,
one we don't make when we keep them separated in our minds.
exactly. It's not 50-50. It's a
It's a
100,
hundred,
100.
it's 100, yeah, or
100%.
100 0 if
Yeah,
you're measuring
100 and 0.
sanity.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Either you, yeah, yeah. And so that, that's, that, and all Jesus is asking us to do is to look at our thinking,
Yeah,
look at our thoughts.
it's incredibly logical. I mean, but not from an ego perspective, but from the perspective of what we really are outside the dream, looking honestly and truly objectively at everything that ego's made in this world. It's like it's nuts. It's totally off the charts and nuts out.
It's nuts. And
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you really look at it that way, then you will laugh.
yeah.
And that's, the point from the very beginning, a tiny mad idea, which the Son of God remembered not to laugh.
Hmm.
Well, that's the problem. When we really look at it, we gotta laugh because it is insane. But at the time we bought the notion, it seemed not only uh, logical, but perfectly, that we could actually do it, that we could actually turn away from God.
We can pull this
Or
thing off.
yeah, yeah,
We think we could.
we think we could.
Yeah,
And as long as we keep trying to fool ourselves that we can, we're gonna, continue to have live in a fearful world.
yeah.
Um, so let's see. And so from her ego's point of view, Helen was quite correct in maintaining her defensive system. Yeah. No, that's logical. Confronted now with this perceived double onslaught, Jesus and the Course, to the existence of her own set of beliefs, Helen's ego responded. Her initial defense was simply to ignore as best she could the person of Jesus, referring to him as an it, or as the voice, not to mention her refusing to pay attention to the thought system he was dictating to her. As we shall see below, Helen chose to concentrate only on how A Course in Miracles presented itself, not what it presented. As she
Hmm.
said to Bill, you pay attention to the content, I'll pay attention to the form.
And to a certain extent, historically, from what we've read about in their biographies and other accounts, I think that's somewhat accurate in terms of, how where they took the material and ran with it, how
Yeah,
what they paid attention to. Yeah.
it's something that was always interested me because, oh, by the way, when I was doing all these other degrees that I was getting, I
Uh-huh.
got a degree in technical writing also,
Okay.
technical writing and editing. And that came in really handy. That's a very handy thing to have because you can get work, pretty
Sure, sure.
easily
Yep. I've
doing
done a
that.
little of that myself, but not in that capacity. Basically, at Grass Valley Group, where I worked for 19 years, when I would write the software for control panels, I found in order to really understand how they would work, I found it helpful to just write the manual. So I kind of made unofficial rough drafts of the manuals. And then the folks in tech writing, I just kind of handed them what I'd written and they just cleaned it up and formatted it properly and did all that kind of stuff. But in terms of the actual content, I'd already, kind of outlined here's how it should work and all that kind of stuff, and what the behaviors were and so forth for
That's
each button
great.
press and whatnot. So I found that actually was really helpful because if I could get the design right first, then I didn't have to do so many iterations on the hardware or the software. And writing the manual first is a really good way design things.
It is, and
Yeah.
it's a way to learn about things too, because
Yeah.
I've written a lot of manuals that I had to literally go out and learn how to do what I was writing about.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to learn how to do it.
Exactly.
So yeah, so but the one thing that in that training, or in getting that degree, one of the major things that was emphasized and that I had to take classes in were grammar, actual how the English language works, form, the how different styles, different things, different ways that you did things. But grammar was really, emphasized, and I had a really great grammar teacher who was who was very strict on the rules of grammar. And so when I'm reading in these things that, Helen was really strict about the grammar. However, I when I read the course, there are many, I find often, where she begins a sentence with the word and, that there are a lot of dangling participles. There are a lot of grammatical. If you were a strict grammarian, and you looked at the course, you would say, well, this is off. But in her mind, in Helen's mind, she said if there was any one thing that was a goof off, she called it, that didn't meet her standards of grammar, she would just quit because she knew that it wasn't right. It wasn't really Jesus. Like Jesus understands of course he does, the grammar content. But anyway, I just found that really interesting, that was her standard. And yet, as a grammarian, looking at it, he's
Grandma
there,
Marion.
Grandma Marion.
That's along with Robin Hood. And
That's right.
I put in the chat something that fun, since we're talking about grammar and punctuation, sort of a close topic. There's a funny book cover. It's called Eats, Shoots, and Leaves.
Oh, I
Uh,
love that. Yes.
yeah, I haven't read the book, but I just love the book cover because it's like the zero tolerance approach to punctuation. Anyway,
Yeah,
it's kind of fun.
it
But
is.
why don't we put the bookmark there, and then next week I'll join you and we'll pick up where we left off.
All right, very good. Well,
Okay.
let's see. I don't put the bookmark here
Okay.
because we'll go to the next page.
Sounds good.
There we go. All
Well,
right.
thank you as always, Lynn, for a very enlightening and fun uh, hour of sharing about Course Miracles.
I love it, Bruce. Thank you so much as well.
Likewise.
And I'm just really grateful to have you with me on Saturday mornings. And just and I love, uh, accompanying you on your adventures as you go, taking wonderful photographs of the desert
Oh,
and the
those are
beautiful
fun too.
things in your
Yeah,
area.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All
Well,
right.
have a
Love
great
you, Bruce.
week and left all. Yeah.